Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got a couple of things to discuss, including a couple of waiver updates, a couple of injury updates. We have two trades, both involving the Minnesota Wild to talk about, and we have 4 trade rumors to discuss, including surrounding teams like the Arizona Coyotes, Carolina Hurricanes, Columbus Blue Jackets, and the Edmonton Oilers. And we'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey Channel. Now, before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. We are so close to a subscriber. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so don't forget to subscribe. We're going to start today's video off by discussing some waiver updates, as we have not had any signings over the past couple of days. There's no PTO updates to talk about after Halak signed a PTO in our last video. Halak's still on a PTO, so is Richie, so is Pishik, so nothing to really talk about there. We do have a couple of other things to talk about in today's video though, so we'll start with the waiver wire update. If you guys haven't already checked it out, I did my separate video here talking about the Tuesday waiver updates surrounding Jack Campbell and Dryden Hunt. Campbell and Dryden Hunt were both placed on waivers on Tuesday. It was really surprising, big piece of news to see Campbell go on waivers, so I did a separate video talking about that. Both players wound up clearing, so I don't think this is as much of a surprise. Hunt's a decent bomb 6 forward. He's very speedy, bomb 6/ spare forward for a lot of teams, but I don't think anyone really wanted to see him, and he did play in the AHL at some points last year too, so I'm not overly shocked that he cleared waivers. Campbell, meanwhile, he's a big-name goaltender, and he's the guy who does have a track record of being good before he came to Edmonton. Even though he was streaky, he was still really good for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's making $5 million. No team's going to claim a $5 million goalie in this sort of cap world right now. So I'm not overly surprised that Campbell cleared, and he's going to be going to the minors. It sounds like, we talked about in our last video, how they could just keep him in the NHL, or they could recall someone like a Calvin Pickard or Oliver Rodrigue. That's something they are going to call up Calvin Pickard, who has 116 games of NHL experience. So not overly shocked that they're doing that. I think that probably would be the right move. So it's not like they're going to run with Skinner and Pickard for the time being in net. So really interesting stuff there. Meanwhile, we also had a waiver placement yesterday for the Pittsburgh Penguins, placing Andreas Johnsson on unconditional waiver for purpose of contract termination. Johnsson, a couple of days ago, signed in the SHL, so not overly surprised that this is the case. So as soon as Johnson's contract is terminated, he will be able to go overseas and play over in Europe. So not overly surprised there, but Johnsson had a fantastic NHL future just a couple of years ago, so I'm quite surprised that he was not able to capitalize on it and be a really good, solid player. With Toronto, he looked like he was going to be a fantastic middle 6 forward, and he just continued to fall from Toronto to New Jersey to San Jose, and then this year to Pittsburgh. So it'll be interesting to see, but Johnsson just could not keep an NHL job, and now he's going overseas. So that's the only placement. I will expect him to clear today, and then it'll be interesting to see what other waiver news we have. But Campbell was placed on waivers on Tuesday. Hunt, who was placed on waivers on Tuesday, who we talked about, both wound up clearing. So Hunt will probably be sent down to the Calgary Flames AHL affiliates. Campbell, it sounds like, will be sent down to Bakersfield with Pickard coming up to replace him. And then we also have Andreas Johnsson going overseas. He's on waivers right now for a purpose of contract termination and probably will get terminated. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Going over to a quick injury update here. Not too many injuries to discuss, and most of them are positive, but we do have a couple of injuries to talk about here. First, with players who were cleared to play over the past couple of days, Christian Fischer and Dylan Larkin were cleared to play and got back in the game action for the Detroit Red Wings, so that's good news. Kaapo Kähkönen was cleared to play for San Jose Sharks, so that's good news. The Philadelphia Flyers got Sean Couturier back, he was cleared to play, so that's good news. The Florida Panthers got Jonah Gadjevich back. He did not get into game action, but at least he's now a healthy body, so that's good news for the Florida Panthers. And Pelech is back for the New York Islanders, so that's good news. He got back into game action for the Isles. And then Andre Lee, who started the season on season opening injury reserve for the LA Kings, he's been cleared to play, and he was sent back down to the minors. So really good stuff there from the Kings too. So a lot of good things there. And then we also have a couple of injury updates. Connor Sherry has an upper body injury suffered in the Bolts last game. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time, and maybe a little bit longer than some people might like. So not overly great news there for Tampa, but it sounds like they might be losing a solid middle six forward for the next little while. Jacob McDonald has an undisclosed injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time, so bad news there for the San Jose Sharks, who could definitely use another solid defenseman like McDonald, who's already missed time this year. And then you have Tristan Jarry, who has an undisclosed injury, currently out day-to-day, which I think is really good given the fact that it looked like it was a really bad injury. So hopefully Jarry's not out for an overly long period of time. It can get back in the not-too-distant future. Challenge Stephenson missed yesterday's game against the LA Kings due to an upper body injury. He's out day-to-day right now, so hopefully Stephenson won't be out for an overly long period of time. Jordan Eberle suffered a leg injury at practice. It sounded like it was a really bad cut to his leg, and he's going to be out for a little while now. Currently, I don't know period of time, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two. So not overly surprised there, but definitely it sounded like it was a really bad injury for Jordan Eberle, so that's not good news. And then you also have Jonathan Quick, upper body injury for the New York Rangers. He's day-to-day right now. The Rangers already have Igor Shesterkin out due to injuries right now. They don't need Quick out as well. So that's a horrible blow to the Rangers lineup right now. And they're going to have to call upon their third and fourth stringers in Domingue and Grand for a time being until one of Shesterkin or Quick are able to get back. The good news is both of them are only day-to-day, so hopefully they shouldn't be out for an overly long period of time. But they are going to be out for the next little while. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But that's your injury update there. We got two trades to talk about here. Not overly significant, but they are pretty big. So I want to discuss these two trades here that we had yesterday. Both involved the Minnesota Wild. So first, the Minnesota Wild made a trade sending Campbell Addison, who's a solid young top four defensive player, in my opinion, who's not fitting overly well with Minnesota, not overly high on him. They sent him to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for prospect Adam Raska and a 2026 fifth-round pick. So it's not an overly bad trade, but I definitely think Addison's worth more than that. Addison's making $125,000 for this year. His contract's up at the end of this year, so he's going to be an RFA. He's a really, really good young player. He's gotten parts of a couple of seasons over the past couple of years. Last year, it was his full first, basically, season in the NHL. He got into 62 games of action last year with the Minnesota Wild, put 3 goals and 29 points last year. It looked really good. Didn't get into any games of action down the stretch or in the playoffs. But definitely, he looked like a really good player. He looked like he could be the Matt Dumba replacement long term. They signed him to a cheap 1-year deal, and he had so far 5 assists in 12 games for the Minnesota Wild, which is not half bad at all. So I definitely do think if maybe the reason why they traded him was because they're worried about his next contract. I do think that with his track record, there's a very likely chance it could be a decent contract for Addison next. And in my opinion, I do wonder if the Wild, with their tight cap situation, were a little bit concerned about signing him long term. Also, I don't think they were overly confident in him as he was playing mostly second, third line minutes. So I do think that there's a very likely possibility that they didn't like him as much as I think they should have. And on top of that, they were worried about his next contract. So Addison winds up getting moved. Not overly shocked there. There was a lot of talk that Addison could get moved in the not-too-distant future. And the Wild do have a really deep prospect pool, so I'm not overly surprised that they would move him, and they could possibly give a couple of other guys over the next couple of years that look like a Hunt or Rourke or Lambos. So I'm not overly shocked that the Wild did this, but I don't think the return was as good as it could have been. I think Addison's going to be a fantastic fit in San Jose. I think the San Jose Sharks should definitely use a couple more younger defensemen. Their defense is not overly great right now, and Addison's probably not the best defensive defenseman, but he's a really good offensive powerhouse who I think in time could definitely put up like 40 to 50 points a year. So I think this is a fantastic buy low option for the San Jose Sharks, and I think Addison will fit in extremely well with the San Jose Sharks in their top 4. Meanwhile, the Wild get a 5th-round pick for the moving him, which isn't a bad pickup to add to their draft capital. They also had Adam Raska from the San Jose Sharks. Not a bad pickup. He's a really young player. He was a 2027 round pick, so he's only been in the Shark system for a couple of years. He had 8 games of NHL action so far up to this point. Not a whole bunch. But he does have no points in 8 games and is a plus run rating, so he hasn't been overly productive with short stints at the NHL level. Last year he put up 11 points in 54 AHL games. This year he has no points in 7 AHL games, so it'll be interesting to see how much of a good player he can develop into. I think he could have developed into a solid bottom 6 forward, but I don't think he's at that level yet. So it'll be interesting to see how the Wild will use Raska. But it's definitely a really interesting trade. I think this is going to be a fantastic pickup for the San Jose Sharks, and you do not have to give up much to get a solid defenseman in Addison, who I think will definitely help them offensively. Meanwhile, the Wild get a 5th-round pick, which is not overly bad. It adds to some of their draft capital they could use possibly even later on in the offseason or later on before a trade deadline. And they also get Adam Raska, who's a decent prospect who can possibly eventually be a good bottom 6-4. So that's a really good move there for the San Jose Sharks. I would say the Sharks definitely win this trade given the upside of Addison, but definitely I think this is a really good move there from both sides. But another reason that the Wild made this move was they made another move just a little while later, picking up a defenseman. The Wild picked up Zach Bogosian from the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for a 2025 7th-round pick. So this is a solid move for both sides. For the Bolts, Bogosian had basically become the 8th defenseman on that team, with DeHaan and Perbix and Radish all passing him in the depth chart. So Bogosian hadn't been getting into consistent NHL action for the Tampa Bay Lightning this year, and there was a lot of talk that the Bolts were going to try and move him on from him. They placed him on waivers, no one picked him up, so they're going to try and find a way to move on from Bogosian, find him a new home, because they weren't going to use him on a regular basis. So far this year, for the Bolts, who had 13 games played, he had no points in 4 games, so he only played a third of their games. So I'm not overly shocked that they wound up moving him. They still have a solid decor, and I think they could definitely live without Bogosian. So it'll be interesting to see what Tampa does with their defense. They still have 7 solid defensemen, so I wouldn't expect them to be overly worried about this, but it does give them a little more cap flexibility. On top of that, they also get a 7th-round pick in return. So just like the Maroon trade, just like the Corey Perry trade, they will get another 7th-round pick in a 2025 draft in exchange for moving on from a couple of pieces. So really solid move there for the Bolts to get at least something back for Bogosian. They could have lost him on waivers too, so they're at least able to get something back for Bogosian. As for the Minnesota Wild, Bogosian's a very good physical, tough defenseman who can be a 6th, 7th defenseman on a team like a Minnesota Wild. So he's a fantastic pickup. He screams Minnesota Wild player, so I definitely do like this pickup by the Minnesota Wild. I think he'll fit in extremely well on like the third pair, maybe with a guy like a Merrill or a Goligoski. I think he could be a fantastic addition for this Minnesota Wild team who's still looking to improve and get back after a slow start. So definitely a really good pickup there in my opinion. I think the Wild definitely win this trade. I think Bogosian is definitely worth a 7th-round pick, and I think if you can definitely start to produce, put up at least a couple of points on the third pair role, or maybe put as like a 6th, 7th defenseman, maybe a spare sometimes, I think Bogosian would be a fantastic addition for the Minnesota Wild. He's a pending UFA, so he's not going to be someone who's probably going to stay overly long with the Minnesota Wild, so it'll be interesting to see, but that's going to be a really, really good pickup there for the Wild. So the Wild move on from Campbell and Addison, get Raska and a 2026 5th-round pick from the Sharks in return, and then go ahead and flip a 2025 7th to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Zach Bogosian. So the Wild make 2 trades, moving on from a 2025 7th-rounder and Campbell and Addison, and getting Zach Bogosian, Adam Raska, and a 2026 5th-round pick. So that's a solid move there from the Minnesota Wild, and I definitely do like their moves. I definitely think the Sharks won the Addison deal, and I think the Wild do win the Bogosian deal. So really good stuff there from both sides, and it gives the Bolts flexibility and moves on from Bogosian. It gives the Sharks another solid defenseman, as they could definitely use a lot of younger defensemen who can grow with their team, and it gives the Wild a good solid physical defenseman who can work on their third pair. It gives them also a draft pick, one that's 2 picks ahead of the one they gave up, so that's a solid move there from them, and they also get a young prospect who could possibly eventually develop into a solid physical bottom 6 forward. So really good stuff there from the Minnesota Wild, making 2 trades, moving on from Addison and adding Bogosian. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on those 2 trades down in the comments. Do you think the Sharks win the Addison deal? And do you think the Wild win the Bogosian deal? Or do you think it's a little bit of a mixed match? Definitely. Love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. We'll go over to a couple of trade rumors to discuss here today. Some of these things Elliot Freeman mentioned on a 32 Thoughts blog that he's been talking about over the past couple of days. I've seen a couple of these other reports from elsewhere as well. So we'll start with the first one. Elliot Freeman mentioned this not only on the 32 Thoughts blog last night, but also he mentioned this on his podcast a couple days ago. And he said that Columbus Blue Jackets forward Eric Robinson seems to be getting some attention from around the NHL. He's done really well. He's a really good bottom 6 forward. I know a lot of teams do like Robinson as like a solid 4th, maybe even 3rd line forward. The problem with Robinson being moved is that his cap hit is not overly fantastic for a 4th liner at $1.6 million, and there's a lot of cap-strapped teams in the NHL right now. Robinson's in the final year of his deal, so it wouldn't be an overly long-term commitment for a team to take him on, but a lot of teams don't have the cap space, so I do wonder if the Jackets maybe move him, maybe retain some salary. I think that's possibly a way they could possibly move him on. If they were to retain half of his salary, the Jackets have a ton of cap space, so they could definitely retain some salary. And once again, he's a pending UFA, so it wouldn't be a retained salary slot that's on the long-term books. It'd just be for this year. So if the Jackets will be open to doing that, they could retain it down to $800,000. I think $800,000, there'll be a lot of teams interested in Robinson. So he's going to be a name to watch out for. Like I said, the Jackets aren't willing to retain money on Robinson, and he's still a $1.6 million player. That might be a little bit too expensive for a lot of teams. So it'll be really interesting to see, but it sounds like Robinson's a name who's out there. A lot of teams have interest in. I could see the Jackets get like a 4th or 5th round pick if they wanted to move Robinson to a team who needs a bomb 6 forward. So I think that'll be a really good move there for the Jackets if they're able to pull it off. And he definitely doesn't still look like he's going to be fitting in long term with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, they already have a solid forward group, and that's with Johnsson, who's going to be a fantastic middle 6 forward eventually in the minors. So definitely, I think that even though Robinson's a really, really good player, I'm not sure he fits with the Columbus Blue Jackets anymore. So I wouldn't be overly shocked if there was a trade for a team who needs some bomb 6 help. And I think if they can make it work cap-wise, the Jackets will definitely be open to it, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Another thing that he discussed, this was over on the Saturday Night Headlines, as well as on the 32 Thoughts podcast a couple days ago, that the Carolina Hurricanes are possibly looking to move a defenseman. It sounds like Brett Pesce is nearing a return, and don't want to have 8 defensemen on the roster again, so it sounds like they might be moving someone. It sounds like DeAngelo is sort of the leading contender to be moved right now. DeAngelo's a solid player, but he's signed for a really cheap, not too expensive deal. I think it's like just over $1 million. So I'm not overly shocked that he might be the guy who's being moved. But they do have a lot of good players, including a couple of pending UFAs like Shea and Pesce. So I do wonder if the Canes maybe look at possibly moving Shea as well. Shea's a really good defenseman, but I think they could make do without him. So it'll be really interesting to see. But it sounds like DeAngelo's the guy on the market right now, and he could be moved in the not distant future, according to Elliot Friedman. He's a really good offensive defenseman, not the best defensive defenseman. He definitely has been bounced around over the past couple of years. So maybe another team could help work with him and be a good, solid third pair defenseman putting up points. So I definitely do think that DeAngelo could be a very good fit somewhere. So it's possible DeAngelo gets moved. I still wouldn't rule out Shea or Pesce being moved either. They're both pending UFAs. They're both decent defensemen. I think Pesce may be a little bit less likely given the fact of how well he helps that Carolina Hurricanes team. But Shea, I think, is also another player who could wind up being moved, who's a really good, maybe second, third pair defenseman, also in the final year of his deal. But I think the Canes could make do without him. So it'll be interesting to see, but it sounds like the Carolina Hurricanes are willing to move a defenseman, whether that be DeAngelo, Shea, maybe Pesce, maybe even a guy like Jalen Chatfield. And it sounds like the Canes, Pesce returning to the lineup, they want to move someone before he gets back. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Going over to another thing that he mentioned in 32 Thoughts blog post yesterday, he said that when talking about the Addison deal at San Jose, he thinks that the San Jose Sharks did check in on Hanifin, but said that there was not a fit there. I don't see the San Jose Sharks really wanting to give another long-term extension to a pending UFA like a Hanifin. But one other team he mentioned, he wonders if had interest in Hanifin, is the Arizona Coyotes. Now, this would actually make a ton of sense in my opinion, but I said the Arizona Coyotes are a team who has a solid goal differential this year, have looked really good. They're in a playoff spot right now. They're a team who has playoff aspirations. He wonders if they would possibly be willing to acquire Hanifin, and if they could possibly even work it in an extension, because it would help Hanifin, and it would help the Calgary Flames in a return. Now, a lot of people would think that the Arizona Coyotes are not a team who's willing to buy right now, given the fact that they're still a team who's transitioning from rebuild to start being a playoff contender, but still, that would be a fantastic upgrade, in my opinion, for the Arizona Coyotes. If they were able to get Noah Hanifin on an extension and get him locked up long term, that would be a fantastic fit, in my opinion. The Arizona Coyotes don't have a fantastic D-core, and all of their players on that D-core are currently in the final year of their deals. Dursey, Moser, Valimaki are all RFAs, while guys like Dumba, Stetcher, and Dermott are UFAs. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Arizona Coyotes D-core, but could you imagine Hanifin being added to a D-core that could include Moser, Dursey, and Valimaki? That would be a fantastic top four, in my opinions, and that would be the number one defenseman that the Arizona Coyotes would need. So it'll be interesting to see if that would wind up happening. Now, if Arizona starts to fall a little bit, goes down in the standings, maybe they don't make that sort of a trade. But the other thing that the Arizona Coyotes have is a lot of draft capital. They could definitely entice the Calgary Flames with a solid trade package, because they have a couple of really good prospect forwards that I think they could possibly move. I'm not exactly sure which guys they would possibly consider moving, but they do have a lot of prospects in that organization. On top of that, they have like a whole bunch. I think it was like over like 8 or 10 picks in the second round over the next 3 years, and they also have a ton of third round picks as well. So they would be able to create a decent enough package that would intrigue the Calgary Flames for Hanifin if they were to have some interest. So it'll be interesting to see. I know Hanifin's a really good top 4 defenseman. I know he's a really good player. I think he would fit in well in Arizona as a top pair defenseman. But the question is, one, would he want to resign in Arizona? I'm not overly confident that he would, but he would go back to the U.S., which is something that we've talked about in the offseason. He probably wanted to do, so that could be a possibility. Arizona also has a lot of cap space, so they could sign him to a higher extension than maybe some other teams could. He could be a solid top pair defenseman in Arizona. Honestly, I think that's a fantastic fit in my opinion, but it'll be interesting to see. I'm not exactly sure 100% if the Coyotes will be willing to be a buyer at this year's trade deadline, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see. I think if they were able to get him on a long-term extension, maybe they would wind up making this sort of a deal, because I think Hanifin, as the number 1 defenseman in Arizona, will be a fantastic fit. But definitely, that'll be interesting to see if Hanifin could possibly go to Arizona. And lastly here, also talking on the 32 Thoughts blog post that he did last night, Elliotte Friedman did say that the Edmonton Oilers could probably be looking for a goalie right now. He says that he sees this as sort of a situation of where Ken Holland may put all of his chips in, and I've seen articles about this also after Campbell got placed on waivers, that it sounds like Edmonton may be going all in for trying to upgrade their goalie position to improve this team. They may have their 2024 first round pick on the table, I've heard, according to a couple of sources as well. So it definitely sounds like the Edmonton Oilers are possibly going to make a trade at some point in time. The question is, when is it going to be, and which sort of a goalie are they going to try and upgrade? Now, it sounds like they could try and make their cap work, even if they aren't able to move Campbell, but I think their preference would be to try and move Campbell either in a trade for a goaltender or in a separate trade. So Elliotte Friedman listed 3 goalies here who have been mentioned and who he thinks could be a fit. One was Jordan Binnington. He said that Binnington's $6 million cap hit, just a little bit above Campbell's $5 million cap hit, would not be something that the Oilers would be easy to fit in. And he says that unless the Blues are already giving up on their season, they're probably not going to try and trade Jordan Binnington. I could definitely see that. Binnington's done all right to start the season, even though ever since he won the Stanley Cup in 2019, he has started to regress, like each and every year after he won the Cup. He's regressed each and every year, so it'll be interesting to see. We know the Blues had interest in moving Binnington before, so I wouldn't be surprised if they would have interest in moving Binnington again. The question is, would they want to move Binnington and add Campbell? I'm not overly confident they would want to do that, and Binnington's played all right to start the season, so it'll be interesting to see if that's a possibility, but this sounds like the Oilers may have some interest in Binnington. Another one would be the Montreal Canadiens and Jake Allen. I could definitely see the Canadiens have interest in moving Allen, given the fact they have a 3-headed goalie monster that would solve that problem if they were to move Allen to Edmonton. I don't think the Montreal Canadiens would have interest in Jack Campbell, so they'll probably have to move Campbell in a separate deal if they were to acquire Allen. But Allen's had a solid start to the season. He's making $3.75 million on the cap right now. I think he's got this year and next year on his contract, so it wouldn't be a bad contract, and I think that would actually be a really good fit. Allen and Skinner is a solid duo. I think that could be a really good stabilizing goaltender tandem, so I think that would be a very fantastic fit for the Edmonton Oilers, and I don't think Allen would be a huge price to pay to take him on, so it'll be interesting to see, but definitely I think Allen could be a very good fit for the Edmonton Oilers if they were to try and trade Campbell elsewhere and bring in Allen. And for the Montreal Canadiens, it makes sense as well, given the fact it would relieve them of their 3-headed goalie monster and have Montembeault and Primo be their solid 2 goalies going forward. So I could definitely see that sort of trade be a really good one for the Edmonton Oilers, and I think it will work out for both the Oilers and the Canadiens. And then another one that he mentioned was sort of UC Saros. He said Saros seems to be the prize that a lot of teams would really want in net, but it would take a massive, massive package to pry Saros away from Nashville. We heard that the Kings had some interest in Saros last year, and that at the deadline and before they went after Korpisalo, they had some interest in Saros. Deal was talked about but never came close. It sounds like Saros could still be moved. The Preds have Askarov in the minors, so I wouldn't be overly shocked if they were to move him and give the reins to Askarov at some point. But definitely, Saros has been a really good goaltender for them. He's like a top 5, top 10 goaltender in the NHL. And I definitely think there would be a lot of teams interested if he was available. He has this year plus next year on his contract before he becomes UFA. And I think there would be a ton of teams interested in him. Now, if the Oilers could pony up an asking price, I think that would be the ideal trade candidate. But the asking price will probably be like multiple first-round picks and a couple of really decent prospects, and not sure the Oilers would have not only the assets, but the drive to actually make that sort of a trade for Saros. So as much as that would be a fantastic upgrade for the Edmonton Oilers, I'm not sure they would be willing to move as much as they need to pull off a Saros trade. But it definitely sounds like the Edmonton Oilers are trying to add a goaltender right now to improve that team. They need a goaltender. They could probably even use another fourth or fifth defenseman on that team. So I could definitely see him look to upgrade a couple of positions, but it sounds like, according to Elliot Friedman and a couple of other places I've seen as well, Binnington, Saros, and Allen are three of the goalies that seem to be mentioned right now. I've seen Binnington mentioned a couple of other places. Allen's been mentioned for a couple of days now. It looks like those are three of the goalies that are being mentioned right now, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But that's sort of where we are right now with the Edmonton Oilers. They're sort of going with Pickard and Skinner right now. They sent Campbell to the minors. They're going with a new way. And it sounds like eventually, when they find the right trade, they will be trying to add a goaltender to improve to this team. So it'll be interesting to see, but that's all the trade rumor updates here to discuss today. That's what I'm going to talk about for today. Definitely have to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. What do you think about Edmonton possibly going after a goaltender? Could they go after Allen? Could they go after Binnington? Could they go after Saros? Could they go after another guy? Definitely have to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Could the Arizona Coyotes acquire Noah Hanifin? I think it's possible. They have the assets to do so. I'm not exactly sure if they would definitely be buyers this year, but if they could definitely pull off a Hanifin trade and get an extension, I could definitely see him pull off a Hanifin trade. So definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. On top of that, do you think the Carolina Hurricanes move a defenseman? Is it DeAngelo? Is it Shea? Is it another one? Definitely have to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Do the Jackets end up moving Eric Robinson? If so, what sort of a trade do you think that he goes to? Where does he go? What sort of team do you think could use a bottom 6-4? Definitely have to hear your thoughts on that. What do you think about the Minnesota trades? Is Addison a really good fit in San Jose? Is Bogosian a really good fit in Minnesota? Love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Plus on the injury updates and the waiver news. Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But that's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're like to, remember to subscribe down below. We're so close to 100 subscribers. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this for all of you guys. So don't forget to subscribe. Also the blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. Definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below, and can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.